Hey guys, Lewis. I wanted to make an update. I was watching a couple of my old videos, um, and one of the great things about these video vlogs and my private journal and stuff like that is that I'm able to go back and reflect upon the things that I said and the things that I've written, and see how it resonates with me. Today, to see if I'm progressing, if I'm regressing, if my opinions of certain things have changed, if my memory, is staying true. And so it's a really powerful tool, and I strongly recommend everybody do some sort of journaling to really externalize your internal thought processes, because then you have a basis, something tangible to look to and to examine. And it's not just therapeutic, it's a really constructive tool. You can look at it like it's easier to get stuff done when you make a to-do list, right? So having something tangible to kind of psychoanalyze your belief systems and the things that are going on in your life, it's very beneficial. And um, and I it's nice to be able to share uh, your reflections, and not everyone's going to be interested in watching these type of videos. They're actually kind of really tedious. As entertaining as I like to think I am, I know this is a tedious venture. But I wanted to give it an update. I'm moving to Idaho at the end of the month. I'm here in Kirkland wrapping up a house I painted. It is very hot today. I have a couple projects that I need to finish, but I'm getting to Idaho at the end of the month. I've really enjoyed my stay here in Washington State. I've been here for 15, 16 years. Um, I got my black belt in jiu-jitsu. Um, I did a bunch of schooling. I started a career in construction. Um, I've been working for myself the last 6 years. I met wonderful people, beautiful women. I'm with a great lady now, and she's my partner, and we're going to move to Idaho and have a homestead. The goal is to get our cost of living down to zero, probably over the course of the next 3-4 years. It's going to take, you know, a lot of investment of labor and materials, but we'll get that homestead popping, and it's going to be a real great resource for my family, my friends, and the community around me. And that's the goal there. And so I watched some of my older videos, and that I was recording during the start of the pandemic, and one of them was the ivermectin kind of video that I shared on my Facebook. And you know the so one thing about COVID and the lockdowns, we seem to be in this weird psychological state. I don't know if we have a normalcy bias, or if it's sort of like because we've kind of gone back to normal the last 8 months. Restrictions have, or last year, the restrictions are gone, and you're not hearing about COVID or this, and less people, almost no one's wearing a mask except for those who are really what I would call political operatives, or um, just really confused and damaged people. A lot of those people are mentally ill, who are still wearing masks, and those who aren't mentally ill, it's a political statement for them. They're wearing these masks because it's a political statement. And it's, in all fairness, is see, I barely wore a mask throughout the pandemic. I put one on just to, like, because I just didn't want to deal with the mess. But I probably wore a mask, like, I don't know, maybe 10 times, 12 times through those 3 years. And mostly it was just to cross a threshold, to get into a building, and then it came off. Um, I fought a good fight. I mean, I left, you know, I should preference this when I know everyone, uh, almost everyone was kind of freaked out at the beginning. And when they said 2 weeks to stop spread, I knew it was going to be 2 weeks, because I had paid attention to what had happened during the swine flu. And in the United States, it really wasn't that much. There was propaganda everywhere talking about how dangerous it was and this and that. Um, but in other parts of the world, they shut down societies with lockdowns, and they had mandatory vaccination programs. But it wasn't as massive in scale as what would happen during the COVID years. But I was paying attention. I was like, well, 2 weeks stop spread. I'm just gonna go to Idaho. I have a buddy there. There's work that needs to be done there, so I'm just gonna go. So I left for 2 months, and I found a piece of property that I was interested in. I spent 2 months there, and I came back, and man, there was no cars on the road. Everyone I saw had a mask on. People were yelling at me as we drove by when I was walking outside to put trash to the curb because I didn't have a mask on. It was some lunacy, and and that persisted for 2 years. And we are, like, almost 4 years later, and there's been no reconciliation for what just took place. In the fact that we're back to normal, it's just like it's weird. I feel like society was just molested by their uncle, and we're just not in a psychological state where we can handle the confrontation and of, like, hey, Uncle Tom just molested me, under the Thanksgiving table. uh we're not. I think most people aren't, they just don't want to deal with what has happened, except what has happened, the blatant overreach of the system, and the coordinated efforts to censor, uh, the those who opposed, the lunacy that was being shoved down our throats. Yeah, and one of the things that prompted this video is that ivermectin. Uh, I was reading an article that ivermectin last month was finally, the COVID era ban on ivermectin has been lifted in Australia. And the ivermectin thing is, because it's not just ivermectin. The whole medical response to COVID was wrong. And it shows you how dangerous these bureaucratic systems are, because there's a diffusion of responsibility. And so if doctors are told how to doctor by a medical board or a series of boards, and then standard of care is dictated by insurance companies that are all intertwined with government, um, you know, you can see that the dangers and the damage that is done. And with COVID, they weren't giving anyone any early treatment or out of clinic treatments, particularly at first. And when, forget the ivermectin, we know Z-Paks, right? And aerosol steroidal inhalers are all common use therapeutics for respiratory illnesses. you don't need to go to you don't have to have a medical degree to know that if you have a respiratory infection, that respiratory steroids will relieve those symptoms, relieve the inflammation. The Z-Pak will help deal with the pneumonia. Um, and this is but they didn't prescribe those things. What they did is they waited for people to be so sick that they couldn't breathe, that they came to the hospital, they were given some oxygen, they put on a ventilator if it was really bad. And when they put you on a ventilator, you had an 80% mortality rate. This is the first year or so of COVID. More so, and I don't want to get too deep on that because I'm already at 11 minutes, but more. Yeah, and those ventilators are uncomfortable. So what do? They put you on a regimen of uh, what was it? Oxycodone, and it's not fentanyl. I think it's methocarbamol or cytobenzene, which is a muscle relaxer. These are end of life medications that they give people who are basically on their way out. And that was the standard of care. Is like no care until you can't breathe, and then when you can't breathe, we put you on a ventilator and then pump you full of opioids to sedate you, so you won't take out your respiratory tubes. Often these people were strapped and then kept in isolation because family members couldn't visit, and their standard of care goes down when you're in quarantine. And it's just like, man, they just murdered most everyone. 80% of the people who were put on ventilators died. If that's your mortality rate, I think you should probably change your standard of care. But so, and these are the details that most people are lacking, but most people aren't interested. It's a willful ignorance of what happened. People don't want to know. Like this Ukraine, and the Ukraine thing is a great example too, is because like, what do the Americans care about Ukraine? They don't. They don't know anything about it. They don't understand that this is a civil war that's been going on for like 14 years. Most likely NATO-backed governments backed a coup, 2014, to change the regime in Kiev. It's kind of. I know it doesn't seem like there's a direct correlation, but you can see that the propaganda machine in this, their ability to basically tell you what to think is really high, and it's scary, and it's why people like myself are leaving. The cities and trying to move towards like more insulated pockets of with smaller communities with more natural resources where we don't have to rely on large systems. But there's this willful ignorance, and there needs to be some sort of reconciliation. During the lockdowns and the COVID years, all sorts of agendas were pushed forward. Technological systems were pushed forward. Financial institutions' agendas were pushed forward. Centralized authority and big government and globalist organizations, their agendas got pushed forward. A lot of overlapping of agendas were pushed forward. So I'm in the camp of that there was a coordinated conspiracy to get this ball rolling, but that probably only needed 20 to 100 people. It's the large bureaucratic systems of the world. They just hop on board with anything, especially with rules. Oh man, you give an HR manager a new rule set to enforce on a corporation. Man, that's a happy camper right there. And you see, at the top of the power structures of the world, at the top of that pyramid, all these agendas were pushed forward. there was no incentive to really kind of rein anything back anywhere down this pyramid. And as we go further down and into the corporate world, HR managers were able to consolidate their authority over the organizations that they were in. And even in my case, I'm self-employed, but I taught at Marcelo Alonso's headquarters for 7 years. I was there 5 to 6 days a week for over a decade. Um, and the people took the COVID as an opportunity to oust me and a bunch of other people from that gym, and then uh, they they started a new gym, a new ownership and they used COVID and the opportunities that were created by the I don't know, the mandatory masking and the enforcement of these COVID policies, to use those as an opportunity to advance their personal agendas. And I saw it everywhere, from large governments to inner gym politics at a small gym like the one I was at. And yeah, there needs to be some sort of reconciliation. I mean, just being like, yeah, or maybe we did go a little overboard on forcing everyone to show us their vaccine status and to go into a building and having to wear a mask to cross a threshold to go sit down at a diner, which was just political theater. Um, and I know I'm getting into the weeds now. It's 17 minutes. I I made a video that said the unvaccinated are the virus, and it was a response to a Washington Post article and a speech given by Klaus Schwab at the World Economic Forum, where he called the unvaccinated the virus. He said the unvaccinated are the virus. And the Washington Post article is like, unvaccinated people have no friends. Unvaccinated people don't care about others. Unvaccinated people, they have no allegiance to the community. Unvaccinated people are just yada yada yada. They're bad people. All they care about are their freedoms, their precious freedoms. And here we are. Three. Not even 3 years later, like a year and a half later, from the time Klaus Schwab gave that speech. And there's no vaccine passports anymore. There's very little mandatory masking. I think in some federal buildings you still need a mandatory mask. You need a mask still, but I think it had been just last month that they quietly in Washington State got rid of the mandatory masking at clinics, at health clinics and stuff like that. So, because I went and got a shot of PRP in my shoulder and my elbow, and they weren't wearing masks for the first time, and they had a sign saying, we don't need to wear this shit no more. So you can see, you can see that a lot of the policies and attitudes that were being projected during the height of the COVID era, the where they're disingenuous. And because you take masking for example, if the mask truly worked, right, and a lot of the talking points around it would be if it just saved one life, it's worth it, right? Which is not true. It's a logical fallacy. But to say that, when you make arguments like that, if it saves one life, well, then why would you ever take it off, right? If the mask worked, why would you ever take it off? It, you know, you is it I don't know. Are you not wearing masks now because you're not being told to? Yes, yeah, you're not wearing a mask now because you're not being told you have to wear a mask. It has nothing to do with the perceived health benefits for you and others from wearing a mask, in public. Um, well, I shouldn't say nothing. That's an absolute. It should have very little to do. The personal motivations for people who wore masks, um, in general, when I'm talking about 90% of the population, it was just that they were being pushed and coerced to do so. I mean, I had a guy grab me at the grocery store, because I wasn't wearing a mask. And I'm like, he worked there, and he's like, "I'm denying you service," and he grabbed me. I was like, this is crazy. You just gonna grab me, and so I shoved him, and he freaked out and started screaming that I hit him, and he's gonna call the police. And then he follows me out to my car, which I thought was crazy. He's taking photos of my license plate. So he's gonna sue me for everything I'm wearing. Like, yeah, it's just like, this is really delusional thinking. And I wrote about that, and it's a kind of funny story, but it's I I should go over to Marcelo's and say hello and all that, but I this was such a red line for me. The locking down of society, the social pressures exerted by those, in the system. Uh, none of the lockdowns were legal. None of the mandates were actually mandates. They weren't legal. There was no one enforcing those vaccine passports. There was no one enforcing the masking. There was no legal apparatus because it was all illegal in the United States. At least it's all illegal because we have a constitution that guarantees us our freedoms, our physical autonomy from the state is guaranteed in this document. And people will rip at it, being like, "What about slaves and this and that?" It's like, what are we even talking about here? I mean, this is 2020, 2019, 2021, 2022. We're not talking about the nuance issue of trying to get rid of slavery in a slavocracy in the 1700s, in the 1800s. No. We founded this country. We had a rough ride getting started, and there were some compromises, but we have our rights are not granted to us by our government. We reserve all rights, are all reserved. All the rights you could possibly have, you already have. The government's role in the United States is literally to build infrastructure, to facilitate the building of infrastructure, to facilitate commerce, and facilitate national defense. That's it. They have very little policing powers over how we live our lives. That being said, it's been eroded, and there's this willful ignorance about the responsibilities that we have in holding each other accountable and living in a just moral society. So it's really hard. It's really hard for me to reconcile with these people, especially when no one's admitting fault. No one's I'm not getting any calls or messages saying like, Lewis, you were a good friend for over a decade, and I noticed, you left graciously, when we had our mandatory vaccine passport system. But that stuff's over. You should really come by. We really like to see you. We think we did maybe we overstepped a little bit. I don't even know. None of that. Even if it was half of that, um, I might be interested. Um, but there can't be, and this is a larger problem that we're facing, is that the systems of the world overstepped so far in this totalitarian and authoritarian state that they're trying to set up, and that they kind of give us a glimpse of their future for us, um, in the powers that they wield over the collective consciousness of humanity. Uh, they overstepped so far that they can't. It was so corrupt and it was so bad. They so many people needlessly suffered, and there was trillions of dollars were transferred from the poor to the richest people. I mean, over the course of the pandemic, the price of gas has gone from $1 and change to over $5 here in Seattle, and this is unsustainable. The direction that we're in is unsustainable. And there's this calm before the storm here. And, I don't want to make predictions, but when people can no longer get to work or feed their families and do the stuff that they need to do to thrive in this world, you're going to see civil strife. And people were all worried about the hundreds of thousands of Americans who are dying from COVID. But at the same time, uh, you know, the official numbers is 1.1 million Americans died from COVID. The CDC director came out and said it's closer to 300 something thousand. During those 3.5 year period, over 2.1 million people died from opioids. Um, Another 2 million people died from medical malpractice. I mean, just if we really cared about human life, we would examine the institutions around us and be like, are they really serving us? Do the people in our lives serve us? Are my social institutions that I'm a part of, do these people really do they respect and cherish this? Do they have the same morality that I do? Because clearly, a lot of the places, I volunteered my time to do lots of things in my life, and 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 to be excluded and vilified because of my unwillingness to comply to some tyranny. Uh, I just it's hard for me to reconcile, and it's not over. I'm 36, and this is not over. All right, you guys, have a good day. I appreciate you. Best of luck.